presiding over a Nadwa house meetings. Consultations relating to serious issues were conducted there, and marriage contracts were announced. The war standard. There could be no declaration of war except with his approval or the approval of one of his sons. Caravan leader. He was the commander of all caravans. No caravan from Makkah could depart, be it for trade or otherwise, except under his authority or the authority of one of his sons. Doorkeeper of the Kaaba. He was the only one eligible to open its gate and was responsible for its service and protection. Providing water for the pilgrims. They would fill basins sweetened with dates or raisins for the pilgrims visiting Makkah to drink. Feeding pilgrims. This means making food for pilgrims who could not afford it. Qusay even imposed an annual land tax for food on the Quraysh, paid at the season of pilgrimage. It is noteworthy, however, that Qusay singled out Abd Manaf, a son of his, for honor and prestige, though he was not his eldest son, and entrusted him with such responsibilities such as chairing the meetings at Ad Nadwa house, custody of the standard, the doorkeeping of Al Kaaba, providing water and food for pilgrims, due to the fact that Qusay's actions were regarded as unquestionable and his orders inviolable. His death did not give rise to conflicts among his sons. However, no sooner had Abd Manaf died, fierce infighting began between his sons and their cousins, the sons of Abduddar, which would have been given rise to further conflicts and strifes among the whole tribe of Quraysh, had it not been for a peace treaty. Thereby, the posts were reallocated to reserve the rights of feeding and providing water for pilgrims for the sons of Abd Manaf, while An-Nadwa house custody of the standard and doorkeeping of Al-Kaaba were maintained for the sons of Abduddar. The sons of Abd Manaf, however, cast lots for their charge. Consequently, they left the charge of providing food and water to Hashim bin Abd Manaf, upon whose death the charge was to be taken over by his brother. After him, it was to be taken by Abdul Muttalib bin Hashim, the Prophet's grandfather. His sons assumed this position until the rise of Islam, during which Abbas bin Abdul Muttalib was in charge. Many other posts were distributed among the Quraysh for establishing the pillars of a new quasi-democratic state with government offices and councils similar to those today. Some of these posts are enumerated as follows. Number 1. Casting lots for the idols was allocated to Banu Juma. 2. Keeping record of offers and sacrifices, settlement of disputes and relevant issues were to lie in the hands of Bani Ishtam. 3. Consultation was to go to Bani Asad. 4. Organization of blood money and fines was with Bani Taim. 5. Bearing the national banner was with Bani Umayyah. 6. The military institute, footmen and cavalry would be the responsibility of Bani Makhzum. 7. Bani Adi would function as foreign ambassadors. Rulership in Pan Arabia. We have previously mentioned the Qatanite and Adanite immigrations and the division of Arabia between these two tribes. The tribes dwelling near Hira were subordinate to the Arabian king of Hira, while those dwelling in the Syrian deserts were under the dominion of the Ghazanites, a dependency that was in reality formal rather than actual. However, those living in the far-off desert areas enjoyed full autonomy. These tribes, in fact, had heads chosen by the whole tribe, which was a demi-government based on tribal solidarity and collective interest in defense of land and property. Heads of tribes enjoyed dictatorial privileges similar to those of kings and were rendered full obedience and subordination in both war and peace. Rivalry among cousins for rulership, however, often drove them to outdo one another in entertaining guests, affecting generosity, wisdom, and chivalry for the sole purpose of outranking their rivals and gaining fame among people, especially poets, who were the official spokesmen at the time. The head of a tribe and its chief had special claims to spoils of war, such as one fourth of the spoils, whatever he chose for himself, or found on his way back, or even the remaining undivided spoils. The political situation. The three Arab regions adjacent to foreigners suffered from great weakness and inferiority. The people there were either masters or slaves, rulers or subordinates. Their masters, especially the foreigners, had claim to every advantage. Slaves had nothing but responsibilities to shoulder. In other words, absolute rulership brought about violation of the rights of subordinates, ignorance, oppression, iniquity, injustice, and hardship, and turned them into people groping in darkness and ignorance. Under such a system, the fertile land rendered its fruit to the rulers and men of power to extravagantly spend on their pleasures and enjoyments, wishes and desires, oppression and aggression. The tribes living near these regions moved between Syria and Iraq, whereas those living inside Arabia were disunited and governed by tribal conflicts and racial and religious disputes. They had neither a king to maintain their independence nor a supporter to seek advice from or depend upon in hardships. The rulers of Hijaz, however, were greatly esteemed and respected by the Arabs and were considered rulers and servants of the religious center. Rulership of Hijaz was in fact a mixture of secular and official superiority as well as religious leadership. They ruled among the Arabs in the name of religious leadership and always monopolized the custodianship of the holy sanctuary and its neighboring areas. They looked after the interests of visitors to the Kaaba and were in charge of putting the code of Ibrahim into effect. They even had offices and departments like those of the parliaments of today. However, they were too weak to carry the heavy burden, as this evidently came to light during the Abyssinian invasion. Religions of the Arabs. Most of the Arabs complied with the call of Ismail and professed the religion of his father Ibrahim. They worshipped Allah, professed his oneness, and followed his religion for a long time until they forgot part of what they had been reminded of. However, they still maintained fundamental beliefs such as monotheism as well as various other aspects of Ibrahim's religion until the time when a chief of Quza'a, namely Amr bin Luhay, came back from a trip to Syria. He was renowned for his righteousness, charity, devotion, and care for religion, and was granted unreserved love and obedience by his tribesmen. In Syria, he saw people worshipping idols, a phenomenon he approved of and believed to be righteous. since Syria was the land of the advent of messengers and their scriptures. He brought with him an idol, Hubal, which he placed in the middle of the Kaaba, and summoned people to worship it. Readily enough, idolatry spread all over Makkah and thence to Hijaz, with the people of Makkah being custodians of not only the sacred house but of the entire haram as well. A great number of idols, bearing different names, were introduced into the area. An idol called Manat was worshipped at Al-Mushalal near Qudayt on the Red Sea, another Al-Lat in Taif, a third Al-Uzza in the valley of Nakhla, and so on. Polytheism prevailed and the number of idols increased everywhere in Hijaz. Amr bin Luhay, with the help of a jinn companion, who told him that the idols of Noah's folk, Wad, Suwa, Yagut, Yauk, and Nasr, were buried in Jeddah, dug them out, and took them to Tihama. At the time of the pilgrimage, these idols were distributed among the tribes to take back home. Every tribe and house had their own idols, and the sacred house was crowded with them. On the Prophet's conquest of Makkah, 360 idols were found around the Kaaba. He broke them down and had them removed and burned. Polytheism and idol worship became the most prominent feature of the religion of pre-Islamic Arabs, despite their alleged profession of Abraham's religion. Most of the traditions and ceremonies of idol worship were instituted by Amr bin Luhay and were deemed as good innovations, rather than deviations from the religion of Ibrahim. Some features of their idol worship were devoting themselves to the idols, seeking refuge with them, uttering oaths in their names, calling for their help in hardship, and supplication to them for fulfillment of wishes. Believing that the idols could intercede before Allah for the fulfillment of people's wishes. Number 2. Performing pilgrimage to the idols, circumambulating around them, abasing themselves and even prostrating themselves before them. 3. Seeking favor of idols through various sacrifices in their name. These sacrifices were mentioned by Allah in His saying, and that which is sacrificed on An-Nusub, stone altars. Allah also says, eat not, O believers, of that meat on which Allah's name has not been pronounced. 4. Allocating certain portions of food, drink, cattle, and crops to idols. Surprisingly enough, portions were also devoted to Allah Himself. But people often found reasons to transfer parts of Allah's portions to idols, but never did the opposite. To this effect, Allah says, and they assign to Allah a share of the tilth and cattle which He has created, and they say, this is for Allah, according to their pretending, and this is for our Allahs, so-called partners. But the share of their so-called partners reaches not Allah, while the share of Allah reaches their Allah's so-called partners. Evil is the way they judge, seeking favors with these idols through vows of offering crops and cattle, as Allah mentioned. And according to their pretending, they say that such and such cattle and crops are forbidden, and none should eat of them except those whom we allow. And they say there are cattle forbidden to be used for burden or any other work, and cattle on which the name of Allah is not pronounced lying against him. Dedication of certain animals, such as Bahira, Saiba, Wasila, and Hami, to idols, which meant sparing such animals from useful work for the sake of these heathen gods. The Bahira, as reported by the well-known historian Ibn Ishaq, was the daughter of a Saiba, a female camel that gave birth to 10 successful females, but no males. It was then set free, and all were forbidden to tie her, burden her, share of her wool, or milk her, except for guests to drink from. And this was done to all her female offspring, which were given the name Bahira, after having their ears slit. The Wasila was a female sheep that had 10 successful female offspring in 5 pregnancies. Any new births from the Wasila were assigned only for use or consumption by males. The Hami was a male camel which produced 10 progressive females and was thus similarly forbidden. It is about these practices that Allah revealed. Allah has not instituted things like Bahira or Saiba, or Wasila, or Ham, but those who disbelieve invent lies against Allah, and most of them have no understanding. And they say what is in the bellies of such and such cattle is for our males alone, and forbidden to our females. But if it is born dead, then all have shares therein. Other types of cattle are also mentioned in this regard. Sa'd stated clearly that these kinds of cattle were dedicated to their false gods. It has been authentically reported from the Prophet that such superstitions were first invented by Amr bin Luhay. The Arabs did all this for their idols, believing that the idols would bring them nearer to Allah, lead them to Him, and mediate with Him for their sake. To this effect, the Quran says, "We worship them only that they may bring us near to Allah." And they worship besides Allah things that hurt them not, nor profit them. And they say, "These are our intercessors with Allah." Another divinatory tradition among the Arabs was casting of azlan, featherless arrows which were of 3 kinds, one showing yes, another no, and a third was blank. They would utilize them while deciding serious matters like travel, marriage, and the like. If the draw showed yes, they would go ahead. If no, they would delay it for the next year. Other kinds of aslam were cast for water, blood money, or depicted from you, not from you, or muslak. In cases of doubt regarding the legitimacy of a child, they would resort to the idol of Hubal with a 100 camel gift for the arrow caster. Only the arrows would then decide the child's relationship to the father. If the arrow shot from you, then it was decided that the child belonged to the tribe. If it showed not from you, he would then be regarded as an ally. But if Mulsak appeared, the person would retain his position but with no lineage or alliance contract. This was very much like gambling and arrow shafting, whereby they used to divide the meat of the camels they slaughtered according to this tradition. Moreover, they had a deep conviction in the tidings of soothsayers, diviners, and astrologers. A soothsayer was someone who dealt in the business of foretelling future events and claimed knowledge of secrets and had jinn subordinates who would communicate information to him. Diviners claimed that they could uncover the unknown by means of a special power granted to them, while others boasted they could reveal hidden secrets by a cause and effect inductive process that would lead to detecting a stolen commodity, location of a theft, a stray animal, and the like. The astrologer belonged to a third category, observing the stars and calculating their movements and orbits, whereby he would foretell the future. Conviction in the information provided by the astrologer was in reality a belief in the stars and the position of particular stars. They would say, "We were delivered rain because of the position of this star." The belief in omens for foretelling future events was common among the Arabs. Some days, months, and particular animals were regarded as portents. They also believed that the soul of a murdered person would fly in the wilderness and would never be at rest until revenge was taken. Superstition was widespread. If a deer or when released turned right, then the work they had embarked on would be regarded favorable. Otherwise, they would fear a negative outcome and refrain from pursuing it. The people of the pre Islamic period, whilst believing in superstition, still retained some of the Abrahamic traditions such as devotion to Al Kaaba, circumambulation, observance of pilgrimage, the stay at Arafat, and offering sacrifices. All these rituals were observed despite some innovations that adulterated their sacredness. As the Quraysh were the descendants of Ibrahim, custodians of Kaaba, the inhabitants of Makkah, and no Arabs besides them had the same status or rights that they did. They referred to themselves as Al-Hums, and they would refrain from going to Arafat with the crowd. Instead, they would stop short at Muzdalifah. It was about this that the following was revealed. Then depart from the place whence all the people depart. Another heresy, despite established in their social tradition, dictated that they would not eat dried yogurt or cooking fat, nor would they enter a tent made of camel hair or seek shade unless in a house of adobe bricks, so long as they were in Aram, the sacred state of the pilgrimage. Out of a deeply rooted misconception, they also denied pilgrims, other than Makkans, access to the food they brought when they wanted to make pilgrimage or lesser pilgrimage. They ordered pilgrims coming from outside Makkah to circumambulate Al Kaaba in clothes provided by Al Hams. But if they could not acquire them, men were to do so in a state of nudity, and women with only some open shirt. Allah says in this concern, O children of Adam, take your adornment to every masjid. If men or women were modest enough to go around Kaaba in their clothes, they had to discard them after circumambulation for good. When the Makkans were in the sacred state of pilgrimage, they would not enter their houses, through the doors, but through holes they used to dig in the back walls. They used to regard such behavior as acts of piety and God consciousness. The Quran prohibited this practice. It is not albir that you enter the houses from the back, but albir who fears Allah. So enter houses through their proper doors and fear Allah that you may be successful. Such was the religious life in Arabia, full of polytheism, idolatry, and superstition. The migration, Judaism, Christianity, Magianism, and Sabaeanism, however, could find their ways easily into Arabia. The migration of the Jews from Palestine to Arabia passed through two phases. First, as a result of the persecution they were subjected to, the destruction of their temple, and taking most of them as captives to Babylon at the hand of the king Bakhtanasar. In the year 587 BC, some Jews left Palestine for Hijaz and settled in its northern areas. The second phase started with the Roman occupation of Palestine under the leadership of the Roman Buthas in 70 CE. This resulted in a tidal wave of Jewish migration into Hijaz and Yathrib. In particular, to Khaybar and Taima. Here they converted many tribes to their faith, built forts and castles, and lived in villages. Judaism managed to play an important role in the political life before Islam. When Islam dawned on that land, there were several famous Jewish tribes: Khabir, Al-Mustalik, An-Nadir, Quraiza, and Kainuka. Mentioned that the Jewish tribes numbered as many as 20. Judaism was introduced into Yemen by a man called Asad Abi Karb. He had gone to Yathrib as part of a fighting expedition and embraced Judaism there. Then he went back, taking with him two rabbis from Bani Qurayza to instruct the people of Yemen in this new religion. There, Judaism found fertile ground to propagate and gain adherents. After his death, his son Yusuf Dhun Nawaz rose to power, attacked the Christian community in Najran, and ordered them to embrace Judaism. When they refused, he ordered that a pit of fire be dug and all the Christians be dropped to burn therein. Estimates say that between 20 to 40,000 Christians were killed in that human massacre. This occurred in October 523. The Quran related part of this story in chapter Al-Buruj. Christianity first made its appearance in Arabia following the entry of the Abyssinian and Roman colonists. The Abyssinian presence began in 340 and lasted until 378. Christianity entered Yemen when a Christian missionary called Phimion, known for his selfless behavior and for working miracles, entered into Najran. There he called people to Christianity, and by virtue of his honesty and truthful devotion, He managed to persuade them to respond positively to his invitation and embrace Christianity. The Abyssinian colonizing forces entered Yemen again in 525 as retaliation for the injustice perpetrated by Dunuwas. They started zealously propagating their faith. They even built a church and called it the Yemeni Kaaba, with the aim of directing the Arab pilgrimage caravans towards Yemen, and then made an attempt to demolish the sacred house in Makkah. However, Allah the Almighty punished them and made an example of them in the worldly life and in the hereafter. The principal tribes that embraced Christianity were Ghazan, Taghlib, Tai, and some Himyarid kings, as well as other tribes living on the borders of the Roman Empire. Magianism was also popular among the Arabs living in the region of Persia, Iraq, Bahrain, Al Asa, and some areas on the Arabian Gulf coast. Some Yemenis are also reported to have professed Magianism during the Persian occupation. As for Sabianism, excavations in Iraq reveal that it had been popular amongst the Chaldean people, the Syrians, and Yemenis. With the advent of Judaism and Christianity, however, Sabianism began to give way to the new religions, although it retained some followers mixed or adjacent to the Magians in Iraq and the Arabian Gulf. The religious situation. The religions prevalent at the time played merely a marginal role in the life of the Arabs before the advent of Islam. The polytheists, who pretended to adhere to the religion of Abraham, were far removed from its principles and inherent ethics. They indulged in disobedience, ungodliness, and peculiar superstitions that left a deleterious effect on the religious and socio-political life in Arabia. Judaism turned into a system of repulsive hypocrisy and the struggle for power. Rabbis turned into lords to the exclusion of the Lord. Their sole ambition was gaining wealth and power, even if it was at the risk of losing their religion or the emergence of atheism and disbelief. Likewise, Christianity opened its doors wide to polytheism and turned too complicated to comprehend. As a religious system, it developed a peculiar mix of beliefs regarding man and God. It exercised no influence whatsoever on the souls of the Arabs who accepted it, simply because it did not concern itself with their lifestyle and did not have the least relationship with their practical life. People of other religions were similar to the polytheists with respect of their inclinations, dogmas, customs, and traditions.